Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our live stream hosted by Defense Priorities. Today's topic is naval power, American shipbuilding capacity, and competition with China. I'm Jennifer Kavanaugh. I will moderate today's discussion. I'm the Director of Military Analysis at Defense Priorities, and I'm delighted to be joined today by three fantastic guests. I will introduce them, and then we will get started right away on our important discussion. First, Dr. Lyle Goldstein is the Director of Asia Engagement at Defense Priorities. He previously served a 20-year tenure at the U.S. Naval War College, where he was awarded the Superior Civilian Service Medal for his achievement. His work at Defense Priorities focuses on the Indo-Pacific, specifically on key flashpoints such as the Korean Peninsula, the South China Sea, the Sino-Indian border, and the Taiwan Strait. Second, Dr. T.X. Hammes is a senior research fellow at the Institute of National Strategic Studies with the U.S. National Defense University. His areas of expertise include future conflict, the changing character of warfare, military strategy, operational concepts, and insurgency or irregular warfare. Prior to his retirement from active duty, Dr. Hammes served for 30 years in the U.S. Marine Corps and served as the commander of an intelligence battalion, infantry battalion, and the Chemical Biological Response Force. And finally, Russell Rumbaugh served as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Financial Management and Comptroller from 2023 to 2025. He additionally served in the Office of the Secretary of Defense's Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Office, on the Senate Budget Committee, and on the personal staff of the House in the House of Representatives. He holds specific expertise in defense budget analysis and holds multiple degrees in political science and security studies. Thank you all for joining me today. The topic of shipbuilding and shipbuilding capacity has been in the news a lot, not just in the defense press, but even in the popular media. It has been discussed in the context of the current reconciliation bill and the president's Pentagon budget. There's been a lot of concern about gaps in the U.S. shipbuilding defense industrial base and what it means for the ability of the United States to compete on the global stage, especially with China. So to start, I'm going to ask a question that I'm hoping you can all answer, and then we'll get more into the discussion after that. Earlier this year, Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker, described the state of U.S. shipbuilding as a death spiral and the Navy as too small to meet today's operational demands. What's your reaction to this assessment? Is he right? What does he get right, and what does he get wrong? Lyle, let's start with you.
Okay, hi everybody. Thrilled to join you here, and thanks especially to both Russ and TX for coming in to dialogue with us at Defense Priorities. I look forward to a good exchange of views here on a topic of great importance. I guess I will start by, I'll disagree with both points made in that statement. I don't think Navy shipbuilding is in a death spiral. Looking across, I think there are some real successes that we should recognize. The Columbia class SSBN, our new boomer, is progressing, I think, pretty well. A little bit delayed, but that's generally expected with a prototype. The Virginia class is, by most measures, Virginia class nuclear attack submarine, by most measures, is a good success. I think that's probably good bang for the buck. Maybe the best single thing we can do for our national security. So I'm glad to see that program is moving along, and it has a lot of important innovations like modular submarine building that we've learned. And I also think it's worth recognizing we've been steadily upgrading our destroyers through, with the Arleigh Burke Flight 3 program, which is, so I just want to say, I don't think it's a death spiral. I don't even think it's a crisis, really. We're proceeding, and I would commend Russ Rumbaugh's work at the Pentagon in I think recently there's been an effort to recapitalize the shipyards, and that's incredibly important. Um, we need that kind of not just to build more ships, but also to increase our capacity to build them and build them well. Um, Let me say, though, there are many things to worry about, and many reasons to believe our Navy is overstretched, and that our strategy could have some very fundamental problems. I mean, we don't have to go back through the terrible accidents that even killed sailors back in 2017. There were two terrible accidents in the Pacific. I'm not at all surprised. Um, we had a major ship burn at the pier, the Bonhomme Richard, in 2020, and then to come to shipbuilding specifically, we could look at both the Zumwalt and the LCS programs as, if not fiascos, quite troubling. So yes, there are things to worry about. But to me, just to get to the second part of the question, is the Navy too small? I would say no. I think we need to reapportion our Navy. We need to steer away from the surface fleet and naval aviation. I think we need to steer some of those resources to undersea warfare, so that that we have the submarines that we need for the future fleet. I'm absolutely convinced the future of naval warfare is undersea. Look no further than the 2023 CSIS first battle study of the supposed war with China over Taiwan, and you'll see that they said typically both forward deployed carriers are lost within the first two turns. So basically, within the first week, we lose both forward deployed carriers. I read that study, every word of it, I think twice. I can tell you that they probably underestimated the lethality of Chinese missile force against our surface force. We should not be investing heavily in surface combatants. What we have is probably fine. I think, sure, we do need a new frigate. That is a major hole in today's Navy. But I think we can reapportion resources. Admiral Papero gave testimony in April, and I think he kept saying, yes, he said submarines are critical, but he also said, emphatically said, carriers are absolutely critical, amphibious attack ships, absolutely critical. I disagree. We got to make choices there. And I would choose to have less of both the carriers and the amphibs and favor nuclear attack submarines, the SSBN recapitalization. I think, let me wind up by just saying, I think, I'm agnostic on AUKUS. But I'm concerned about that. We don't need to be building like 40 icebreakers. That I think is crazy talk. In general, again, we can sort of reshape our Navy for today's needs, work with allies, and also we need to. I'm quite concerned that both in the South China Sea and Taiwan, we need to, let's say, rein in our objectives, bring the strategy back into line with available resources. Thanks very much. I look forward to listening to the other panelists.
Great, thank you, Lyle. TX, what do you think? How do you react to both the prompt as well as to Lyle's?
I'm going to agree with Lyle on the fact that submarine warfare should be an emphasis. Carriers and amphibs, big amphibs, need to go away over time. But I'm going to counter that by saying I think shipbuilding is too limited. Even if we could double it, we could barely sufficient to keep our fleet from shrinking. And we've agreed I think it's too small. We can't begin to replace combat losses. As Lyle said, and as Admiral Swift said years ago, the price of entry into war with China is 2 carrier battle groups. So we can't maintain or man the current fleet as we have it. We can't replace combat losses. So it's an entire bureaucratic problem. It's not just shipbuilding. It's the process we're using. Now, unfortunately, the first rule of all bureaucracies is bureaucracies do what bureaucracies do. And when that doesn't work, they do more of it. And that's what we're doing. We're doing more of it. I think we have to think differently. This is really about weapons, not platforms. We've entered an era where any ship can kill any other ship, with the exception of the submarine. A submarine's still a hard kill. So if you focus on the weapons that kill ships and you mass produce and stockpile those, and we've got those available now. Onderill's got the Barracuda family, that Copperhead family. Ares Industry has cheap long-range cruise missiles. Lockheed is coming up with CMMT. And these are a fraction of the cost of the current missiles, and their commercial materials and advanced manufacturing, so we can produce them in large numbers. Our big problem now is, we're going to get a frigate maybe in 5 or 6 years, and we'll do 1 or maybe 2 a year. It's just insufficient. Aircraft are an even bigger problem. The F-35 lifetime cost, according to the program manager, is $730 million per airframe if you divide the total cost of the program by the airframe, but that does not include development costs. Now, since F-35s only work half the time, you got to buy 2 to get 1. So that's $1.4 billion. But really, if you want full capability, you got to go to full mission capable, which is 30%. So 3 to get 1. So your real cost of an F-35 lifetime is $2.2 billion. So again, it makes no sense to spend your money on that when there's so many other things. You could have literally thousands of them. Valkyrie, which is Kratos' attack drone, that's autonomous and can go out to 3,000 miles, or in other words, about 3 times farther than a F-35, comes in at $3 million a piece. So we could do 250 of those for the price of 1 F-35. The other thing we need to do is containerize everything. Again, if it's about the ship or about the weapon, not the platform, the fact of the matter is we are now containerizing command and control, electronic warfare, radars, missiles, rockets, USVs, UUVs, UAVs. So any ship can be armed as a warship, and any ship can kill any other ship with cruise missiles coming out of containers. The other interesting thing is an emergent ship armed with the current family of missiles and the emerging family of missiles like the Barracuda would actually compete equally for both U.S. and Chinese warships on range and vastly outrange the carrier battle group. And the key to that is, particularly if we buy the Valkyrie, you're way out there. The key to that is range has made ships obsolescence in the past. The battleship's defeated by the carrier because it's outranged. The carrier's outranged by missiles, so it's defeated. If you go to container ships, it's very easy to upgrade. You lift off the old system, put a new one on. And container ships are pretty tough. If you look at the history of cruise missiles versus surface ships, one cruise missile hit is either a sunk ship or a mission kill. And that's all I need in a battle is a mission kill. On the other hand, a container ship, maybe 300 containers are used for weapons, crew, etc. And the rest, 1,000 containers, can be filled with foam. You've got a double hold container ship, lots of containers filled with foam, it'll be much tougher. So stop building carriers and big amphibs. If we stop today with the ones we've got in the books, we'll still have 4 through about 2045, or we'll have 7, and then 4 through 2077. Build weapons, buy mer ships, test the concept, and start to stockpile. Once a war starts, there's going to be lots and lots of ships available, because if China's fighting America, shipping is going to dry up badly. And there's going to be a lot of cheap ships available if we're ready with containerized weapon systems in large numbers and crews trained to use them. Okay, that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much for bringing up those important points. Russell, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you all of Defense Priorities, and appreciate my fellow panelists' comments and looking forward to the discussion. I hate to say, I think my biggest reaction to the prompt is I'm worried my answer changed in my time at the Department of the Navy. One of the things I think we could explore is, did it change because I became more familiar with the question, or because we have passed an inflection point in just the last few years? And I think that's one of the big questions that's challenging us and challenging the nation as we think about this. I ended up spending way more time on shipbuilding than I expected to as the comptroller. Maybe that's naive of me. Ships are expensive. Obviously, they're going to make a big chunk of the Navy budget. Obviously, I was going to work on it. But when I got into the seat, we were reworking the budget 4 times a year to account for rising ship costs, even though it's supposed to be an annual budgeting process. That recognition that we were sliding down a slope caused me to spend ever more time. My team had to plunge into the topic, and we got more involved than I think the FM side really does on shipbuilding usually. The other thing I'd point to is the 2022 National Defense Strategy used the phrase for China, the pacing challenge. Folks have referenced some prior work of mine. I'll be hard pressed to say that the United States, after spending at least $500 billion a year on defense for the last 50 years, isn't going to be great. And that's before we talk about the Americans who man the US force. Nevertheless, when we start talking about the term pace, if you look at US shipbuilding, especially warship building, and Chinese shipbuilding, it is clear we are not keeping pace. Those two perspectives make me think there is something going on here. Now, the solution is difficult. We got to where we are from a very traditional relationship. The Navy to Congress to the shipyards, that relationship has done all three pretty darn well for the last few years, or for many, many decades for that matter. But now it's starting to fall short. Now we are facing a true national problem as we confront the operational threats both Lyle and TX talked about. So how do we get out of those traditional relationships and get to something new that can account for the changed world, both here in the US and the world we live in more broadly? I'll tease before we go on to the questions. What's interesting to me is how much the Navy has already seen that they can't keep doing business as usual. For once, it's not the Navy driving the results. Somebody mentioned Zumwalt, LCS, those are clearly Navy-driven solutions. Well, now the Navy is driving the solutions Lyle referenced. Virginia class, the DDG-51, tried and true programs that the Navy has been very consistent with, and ones that will serve operational needs for many years to come. Yet, nevertheless, shipbuilding hasn't gotten better, as we've just discussed. That creates a true national problem, not just a Navy problem, and a really difficult one to get at. I'm looking forward to the conversation as we try to figure out what to do and how to do it.
Great. So those are three really great answers that I think teed up a lot of the issues that we want to get into today. To start, I want to take a step back and build off something that Russell just said, which is this idea that shipbuilding is a national problem, not just a Navy problem. And I would like to ask, maybe Russell, you could start since it was your point. Why does shipbuilding hold this position of importance in our discussion about national security? What is it about shipbuilding that makes it different? We don't hear the same discussions happening necessarily around aircraft or even a lot of the other types of munitions. These things rarely break through into the popular press. And yet shipbuilding has taken on a real importance. We've seen President Trump talk about it numerous times, even since he just came into office. So why shipbuilding? Why is it so important? And what's the link to our national security?
Jennifer, it's a great question. I have to push back on the premise a little bit. Munitions has broken through too, or more importantly, it is a staying power, right? If we are going to talk about true expenditures of munitions in war, in combat, munitions has broken through. It's a slightly different conversation, not least of which because it is something that can scale. What gets shipbuilding in trouble is the carriers you fought World War II with, we had built before World War II. It is a long-term thing. It is not something you do in the moment. And so that is a challenge that requires thinking ahead and preparing ahead. The Navy is not wrong at their distinction between them and the Army drawn in the very Constitution. The other thing I would tee up, especially for my fellow panelists, the other reason shipbuilding is important is we can talk about what happens if we really do end up in a shooting war with China or anybody else. What's different about the Navy and shipbuilding is we use those same platforms every day all around the world. That presence, that expression of American leadership without direct intervention, something right up defense priorities line, that is another big distinction and why it is so nerve-wracking that we are facing an inflection point different than what we've had in the past.
Lyle or TX, do you want to weigh in on that question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the point about presence is an interesting one. Secretary Work made the point that presence has essentially destroyed the U.S. Navy. We spend so much time forward deployed, we can't maintain the ships, we don't train the ships, we exhaust the crews, and people leave the Navy. The second point I'd like to make is while we talk about shipbuilding, our aircraft building is really in the tank too. If we reach peak production of the F-35, we'll be able to produce 12 a month. There's no way to double that production rapidly or anything else. In a major war where we're sharing this airframe with 17 other air forces, 2 navies, and a Marine Corps, you're in a big war. It may not be your turn to get an airplane. So I think whereas broken on airframe, again, this focus on exquisite, expensive platforms is killing us. It's not about platforms anymore. It's about weapons that reach out 1,000 to 3,000 miles autonomously and can be launched off any platform. If you containerize them, they're platform agnostic. Ships, land, you can even put them in an aircraft and fly them somewhere.
Yeah, I might just agree here with TX that I do think, and I remember Secretary Work's comments that presents are a problem. And it makes me think, though, that as we consider, the surface fleet and how it, I take Russ's point that the surface fleet, may be in action every day. But is that what we want? Is that what the founders wanted? And there is an element of if you got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I would like to see us using force less widely. And to me, that could be actually an incentive a little bit to, again, steer away from the surface forces, which are so handy in that sort of gunboat diplomacy role. But I think the larger problem we're facing here to bring China back into this is this, the fact that they seem to have, and I have to say, having done some investigation on China shipbuilding myself for years at Naval War College, this figure that's batted about of them having 230 times the amount of shipbuilding capacity that we do, I must say I think it is accurate, and that is a kind of a problem. But to me, it argues for the fact that we are not, if we could change it from 230 to 1 to 230 to 5 or 10, I guess that would be a real achievement. But would it really change the equation? So we should go where we're strong, and we're strong undersea. And that's why we need to start to divert resources. But we also need to talk about trimming commitments. We can't, be fighting everywhere all the time across the planet. We have to decide what is truly important. We need to rely on our allies maybe a bit more. Some of them are very capable shipbuilders. I hope we'll talk about the South Koreans and the Japanese in that respect. But part of it, to answer Jennifer's question, is, let's face it, nothing looks better than a beautiful destroyer. And I think, people around the world are taken with that. Americans are taken with that. And so it's hard to kind of steer resources away from this, the tried and true. And of course, the aircraft carrier is the number one example of this. But I remember being in Newport and hearing various retired admirals saying these things were obsolete before the 1980s. They were already deeply vulnerable and not a platform you want to put all your eggs in. Over.
Lyle, that brings up a really important point that maybe you could elaborate a little bit on for the audience. Is you and TX have both brought up here the fact that these large destroyers and amphibious ships and carriers aren't all that useful to the types of conflicts that we expect the Navy to be facing today. Can you explain a little bit more why these types of systems that seem to attract so much attention in Congress and so much money aren't actually the types of ships that the Navy needs, and what that says about how we should think about the shipbuilding challenge in front of the United States?
Yeah, well, a simple answer is that the threats they're facing, which are multifarious, undersea threats, and China's submarine force becomes ever more formidable. That's the foremost area I was studying at the Naval War College. But you've also got mines, but truly the anti-ship cruise missile threat is really ominous. And of course, when China looks at taking on one of our fleets, they're not going to fire 6 or 8 of these. They're going to fire 60 or 80 or hundreds. And they know well that they can overwhelm our defenses. So even the best defenses, I think, if we're having our hands full defending against the munitions the Houthis are shooting, well, by golly, just imagine. And people have imagined. People have done very serious studies at the vulnerability of these ships. And like I said, that I believe the highest fidelity look is that 2023 study by CSIS, which very candidly, notes that we might lose, a third of our Navy within a month. That's within 1 month, and I don't think the war would be over within a month. So we need to really try to avoid that kind of Tsushima Strait-like event against the U.S. Navy, and that's why we have to strongly go undersea, where we're still strong. Those are much more survivable platforms. And I didn't even mention the drone threat, but when you combine the drone threat with the anti-ship cruise missile threat, and I'll remind you, China's anti-ship cruise missiles are not just superior, but substantially superior. I'm talking about like YJ-18 to what we have in our fleet. Over.
So with that,
Yeah, I'd like to address that too. I think the key, Lyle's right. Undersea is the way to go. I'm not sure that we can build the number of Virginias we need. So there's some very interesting work being done on XL UUVs, which have navigated successfully autonomously over 1,000 miles underwater and are being built in with the ability to launch both light and heavy torpedoes or mines. So underwater is the way to go. The carrier's biggest problem is it's a self-licking ice cream cone. The entire fleet has to protect the carrier because there's 5,000 people on it. But its airplanes are so short-legged, it can't do anything. They get out about 500, 600 miles, and the missiles are coming from 1,000 or more miles away. So essentially, it's out there to protect itself. We're spending $20+ billion on a ship platform, not even counting the escorts, that really doesn't do us any good.
yeah,
You guys are
Russell,
really trying.
go
You
ahead.
guys are really turning me into a Navy partisan. TX had 30 years in the Marine Corps. Lyle had a distinguished career at the Naval Postgraduate School, and here I am boasting about the Navy. One of my colleagues threw out the idea of, is this what the founders wanted? Wildly, this is something we know. TX, the Barbary Pirates, mentioned the Marine hymn. That's founders era. The 6 frigates, the quasi-war, we saw them use their naval forces. Both my fellow colleagues have talked about reapportioning, about moving funds, but they've kept that within the Navy conversation. When we talk about how to keep American leadership globally without getting bogged down, it is very much that. We threw out the words gunboat diplomacy, usually meant in a negative way, but if the Red Sea doesn't seem like a great example of positive leadership without getting bogged down, what else is there? So when we talk about what kind of Navy we need and how to do the shipbuilding, we can't think just about that 1 month or 1 week to defend an invasion of the Taiwan Straits. What is happening in the rest of the world? Or even if you want to keep it in there, what happens if there is a lodgment on Taiwan and we then need to run a blockade? We won't be doing that just with submarines. Again, I think this question balances much easier if you start talking about the entire force rather than just starting only with the Navy and reapportioning.
Okay,
Yeah, I think the problem there is that the war in Taiwan, if you look at history since 1750, wars between healthy powers have lasted between 3 and 23 years. We cannot build any more ships. I mean, if the war starts now and it ends in 4 years, we might get another carrier out there, maybe, provided they're not messing with us. So that's a really bad argument for the current platform. I'm in favor of a Navy. I'm just in favor of a Navy that's useful. A bunch of Marines on a big fat amphib is 1,000 Marines neatly packaged for destruction. It can't defend itself. It can't get within range. It's kind of useless. If you distribute them on small ones like the landing ship medium or commercial platforms, then you change the formula entirely. The Red Sea is a perfect example. We've got a society that's essentially rooted in the 7th century, except for a small percentage which is being supported, and they have fought the U.S. Navy to a draw. So how in the hell are you saying these big ships do us any good? We got a bunch of tribesmen with a few missiles. We spent $1 billion, and they're still there. And guess what? The Turks went after them for 400 years and didn't get them. So this is the problem. The Navy can be useful, but only if we get out of the idea that was created 100 years ago, the carrier strike group.
Lyle, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I got a few comments. This is a great discussion, firing on all cylinders. But I think just quickly, TX mentioned the XLUUV, the X-Love, a strange name for it, but what these are extra large unmanned, they're basically robotic submarines. Is what they amount to. And yes, I agree, they do show quite a bit of promise. But I do want to suggest to the group, and I follow the Chinese Navy very closely. I dare say I read everything they write practically, and will say that they are moving very quickly ahead. In fact, one theory on Chinese undersea warfare is that they recognize that we are the kings in, on nuclear submarines. So they are going in the other direction. They are going to after these X-Loves. And also after conventional submarines. So that, to me, that is plausible that they may indeed try to kind of leapfrog us. One thing I left out of the issue of carrier vulnerability that I really think is important to emphasize is TX also mentioned it's sometimes hard to sink a surface ship. It's not hard to put a carrier out of action. I mean, it really doesn't take much. Maybe just put a hole in that deck, or a dent anyway. That works just fine. And then the carrier is completely useless. Or, Chinese also investigating, what if you destroy the oiler? Now, these are nuclear powered carriers, you say, so they don't need oil. No, that air wing drinks a lot of oil. So you do need those oilers. And of course, the Chinese will target the oilers there. I do think, hopefully we'll get to talk about the Taiwan scenario a bit. I really think in some ways that is the problem, that if the Pentagon and our national leadership could just decide basically that is a bridge too far, that is, we cannot fight that fight, that we do put ourselves in danger of a Tsushima Strait like naval defeat if we fight this on sort of China's best possible ground, their best possible scenario, where they can bring everything into that fight against our Navy. That is a very dubious proposition in my view. But if we can come to a consensus that Taiwan is not essential, it is not a vital interest, it's not a treaty ally, it's not essential to U.S. national security, at that point, we can have a reasonable discussion about what our Navy looks like, what our needs are to defend, allies like Japan, South Korea and Philippines. And that's very doable. And it's doable under the current budget, and it's doable with the current shipbuilding outlays. Over.
Great, Lyle. So that's a great segue. Let's go there. Let's talk about, is the problem with shipbuilding really a question of number of ships or types of ships, or is it an overextension of U.S. strategy that the United States has taken on missions that it can no longer support given changing balances of power? I think we could have a whole separate live stream. Many have been had about the challenges in the Red Sea. I think whether or not the United States was successful is an open question for me. But certainly the problem wasn't lack of naval capacity. So is this really all about whether or not the United States can defend Taiwan? Is that the question that is driving this obsession with having more ships or bigger ships or different ships? And if that scenario is taken off the table, would that lessen the pressure on shipbuilding? Lyle, you already started talking about this, so I'll go to you to add any additional thoughts, and then to the other panelists to hear their views.
Yeah, I mean, my appraisal of a Taiwan scenario, and again, this is mostly riffing off the 2023 analysis, which, God bless them, the people at CSIS. I don't agree with a lot of things in there, including some of the assumptions, but they did do, dozens of iterations of these games. So I think the results have at least, a decent amount of fidelity. So when there's a sentence in there where it says the United States one sentence says, the United States can expect to lose every single surface warship in the Western Pacific, every one. There's another moment where they say we would be losing a large surface ship every single day of this war. Can you imagine, those kind of losses? So how does it look to me? It looks to me like the surface fleet doesn't go anywhere near Taiwan. Why? Because they'll be sunk, as the report lays out. So we have submarines endeavoring to win the war. But my analysis is that submarines can't even come close to winning that war. Why? because well, A, there aren't enough, but even if we had double the number of submarines, the magazine on a submarine is pretty small. And guess what? If you want to get more torpedoes for that submarine, you're not going to do it quick, and that submarine is going to have to travel a long way back. And by the way, the Chinese would target those base points where we store torpedoes and so forth. So you just don't have anywhere near the firepower from those submarines. Therefore, what I'm saying is this is a bridge too far. Why? Because it's so Taiwan is so close to China. It's just 90 miles. I mean, imagine if China decided one day, or Russia or something, that they were going to stop the U.S. from invading Cuba. I mean, it would be kind of analogous. I mean, could they stop us? No, they absolutely could not stop us. And it's the same thing. We're talking about a superpower. I mean, last thing I'll say is, in the Navy, we say a ship's a fool to fight a fort. But that's essentially what Taiwan is. It's so close to the Chinese coast. It's essentially, we're fighting a fortress, the Chinese fortress. And, to fight your way into that is suicidal. And let's not put our sailors in that kind of mission impossible circumstance. I mean, that's in a way what we did in Afghanistan. We put our soldiers in mission impossible. I don't want to do that again. And here, the results for our country could be catastrophic. Like I said, it's Tsushima-like moment. It's a nightmare.
I'd like to follow up on your point about the carrier being vulnerable. We've proven this. The Oriskany, the Forrestal, and the Enterprise all had accidents on deck where an aircraft full of fuel detonated, and they got mission kills. The Forrestal was out of action for 9 months. They're hard to sink. They're easy to take out of action. If I get a pound of explosive next to an aircraft on the deck, I have a mission kill for at least a couple of weeks. That was when we had the Philippines as a major ship repair facility. We don't have that anymore. So it's got to go all the way back to the west coast of the United States probably to get repaired. So that's a problem. I absolutely agree the surface fleet has no business going anywhere near China. It'll just get sunk. But I disagree. I think if we change the way we think about the conflict and focus on the weapons, if you have thousands and thousands of smart weapons, either in the Philippines or in Japan or stored in Taiwan, you can bust up that amphibious invasion. If you go after the connectors, the problem in an amphibious force is getting logistics ashore and forces ashore. And that's the small craft. If you get all of those, it doesn't take a big warhead. And we are now reaching a point where we're producing long-range weapons that are in the inexpensive range, or relatively inexpensive range, if we choose to do that. Again, we got to get off the idea it's about ships. It's not about ships. It's about ordnance delivered to the target. Where that ordnance comes off of is irrelevant if we buy the right ordnance.
Jennifer, I'm going to answer your question even more directly. Before we pontificate about what the future war unfolds, the problem is shipbuilding is acute today. The 2 Virginia-class submarines in the FY26 budget are 40% more expensive than when they first entered the fit-up. That is something that cannot be sustained. It's fun being the richest country on earth. We can sustain using million-dollar missiles to shoot down tens of $1,000 drones for a very long time, especially if munitions does get ramped up. But we can't maintain the current force if shipbuilding continues on the way it is. That's what makes it a national problem today before we even speculate about what happens in future wars.
Well, that's exactly the point. We can't build the ships today. We won't be able to build them tomorrow. So why the hell are we talking about ships? If you've got this failed path you're going down, you don't try to do more of it. You do something different.
All right. Well, I think that moves us in a great direction here, which is, I think 2 questions. One is, what is the problem with shipbuilding? What are the impediments? Why can't we build ships today? Or why won't we be able to build them tomorrow? And it seems listening to you all, it applies to all ships. It's not just big ships. It's also small ships. It's undersea vessels and submarines. So what's the problem? And what do we do about it? What policymakers have thrown a ton of money at this. Russell, you referenced having to redo the budget 4 times a year. Is it working? Are we making any progress? Who wants to start? Russell, you're first.
So what's frustrating is we're not that long ago when Virginia class submarines on Block 3 were coming off the line on time, on budget, with 20% profit margins for the shipyards. That's still within the last decade. It's not that building ships is fundamentally impossible. And most importantly, as I alluded to when we began, the traditional defense acquisition problem is we decide that we're going to build some kind of beautiful silver bullet, some spectacular system. And when we go to gunmetal, it doesn't work as well as we think. And it turns out that drives cost and that drives schedule. But that's not what we're doing with Navy shipbuilding right now. Virginia class is a proven 40-year-old program. The DDG 51 is a proven 40-year-old program. We have to have a little bit more of a conversation about frigate, although that is not a leap ahead program. And even Columbia class, which has been the #1 defense program for a decade, is mainly an incremental improvement over the Ohio class. So there is something about making sure we change the political economy of shipbuilding, making sure we get out of what had worked pretty well and recognize that we do want a fleet at sea. We do want a fleet around the world, even as we're not quite sure what it's going to do. And we know it's not going to solve fundamental problems like how you end Houthi rebels in the Arabian Peninsula. It still has a value and it still has a work. And that is the challenge facing us.
Lyle, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I live in Rhode Island, and so I even when I'm riding the bus sometimes to work, I see these ads for electric boat, and I want to scratch my head and say, well, how would I do as a welder or something like that? It seems like pretty good money. So I'm in a community where we're seeing some of this go on, and there are some positive things. I think it's probably a good thing that EB and Navy people go into the classrooms in high schools, even junior high schools, making the case that this is a solid career for people. So that's good. And yes, for the foreseeable decades ahead, we are going to have submarine building jobs, a lot of them. But I would just highlight, on the downside, from what I hear, we cannot possibly hire enough people in these shipyards. Why? Because people cannot pass drug tests. That's pretty sad, I think, and it speaks to kind of one of the larger problems, that we see partly it's also our communities are not set up this way. There are certain social problems here that may prevent us from going very seriously into shipbuilding. And so I do think TX is right there, that instead of having this fantasy where we become China, it's just not going to happen. I mean, and I would love to, I've walked around Chinese shipyards. I've spent a lot of time in Qingdao, Dalian. It is truly incredible to behold. And I've done, very, very close studies of some of their warships, and I'll tell you, even their surface ships can go head to head with some of ours, maybe superior even. So this is serious, but it does suggest to me, Chinese society is very different, and these quick fixes are not going to work. To me, we should again concentrate on what we're good at, that is undersea. That is, realize that you have limited resources, and let's focus on that. I will say on the drone. Well, by the way, TX's idea on the merchant ships, arming merchant ships, I think it has some merit, especially as like a kind of plan B, plan C. I mean, there are a couple problems though. One is that China has the largest merchant marine in the world. They have talked actively about this, so I don't doubt that they could sort of 10x us or 100x us on this in this area, and sort of this could bite us in the butt, unfortunately. But still, I think his general idea of looking for kind of really low cost platforms that can bring some firepower, definitely, and I do think is that a discussion we should have even today here is like, what percentage of our fleet going forward should be unmanned? And is it going to be 10%, 15? Are we willing to go with even something like 30%? That to me is a good question, and that carries with it some real risks too. Over.
Yeah, I think one of the things we got to remember is the mobilization for World War II came out of the civilian shipbuilding industry. We were the biggest shipbuilder in the world at the time. We surpassed Britain. So that whole thing went away. So the yards went away, and we were down to government-supported yards, very small ones, and in the wrong places. The one in Bath, one of the things you talk to the guys, managers up there, there's nobody to hire, and nobody wants to move out to East Jesus, Maine, and survive the winters up there, particularly since there's no guarantee Congress will have a budget next year. So you may find yourself, you've moved all the way to Maine for a high-paying job, and there's no money next year. So we have this ridiculous system where if we were to consistently build, and maybe if the one program we would consistently build would be submarines and other undersea warfare systems. In a long war with China, again, it's going to be economic exhaustion. We get that by blockade, distant blockade. While China can outbuild its 230 to 1 on ships, that's only if they have iron ore. And Australia has all the iron ore, Australia and Indonesia. And it all has to come through narrow straits to get to China, straits we can control, because they're at a great distance from China. So I think we've got to rethink our entire thought process about that. We stave off the invasion with lots and lots of cheap missiles, cheap drones that start within a few hundred miles, and then we win the long war through economic exhaustion. But again, this does not come about by scrambling to build more destroyers or more carriers after the war has started. It comes from preparing for mass production, which is what Anduril's done and what Kratos have done, that can allow us to produce thousands and thousands of weapons that outrange what China offers. The Kratos can go 3,000 miles. That's out of the range of everything except the very high-end Chinese missiles, which are millions and millions apiece, and have very limited, they can't move around much. So we've got to rethink how we're going to fight this war, and then rethink our entire investment. Yeah, haze, gray, and underway is a beautiful thing to see and doesn't really scare people much anymore.
I got to push back a little bit. So we've done both the tactical and the strategic. Let's talk about the shipyard workforce briefly. My first visit up to Electric Boat, I had heard, workforce woes, and I show up, and the management says, yeah, we're about a 15,000 person workforce, and we hired 5,000 people last year. If anybody has ever been a part of an organization that's growing, that's a spectacular accomplishment. So TS can make fun of those New Englanders, but there are people there. They were hired. The problem is attrition. They get hired and they leave. It's not clear we are paying those people enough. The Navy just relet the contract to allow more allowable costs for wages for that workforce that the Navy and the US government will pay. Although, shouldn't we be a little offended that we have private enterprises that don't know to keep their seed corn, to keep their artisan tradesmen, to know they need to pay those people so they don't go become baristas at Starbucks? What's the point? We have our own yards. We know what it's like to try to use government bureaucracy to entice people. Why isn't the private enterprise working? That is the fundamental question we have to answer. I'm not convinced that the fundamental question is, what is the Navy we need of the future? Because my two fellow panelists keep ignoring what presidents reach for time and again. One of my mentors and his colleague wrote the book, Force Without War. Pre-war, the #1 tool presidents work for, naval forces. They turn out to be flexible, agile, you move them around, and you don't get bogged down. They wrote the book in the 70s. That's before Ernest Will, where we reflagged tankers in the Gulf in the 80s. That's before Red Sea operations today. There's a difference between saying we want to do less and actually retreating from the world. That is something we should not be blurring over. And that's a much, much harder question.
Russell, I'm not saying we don't need a Navy. I'm not saying we don't need the Navy we're building. The forward presence prevents war is a bit of an iffy proposition. How do you prove a negative? So I'm not sure that's valid, but I do know that the Navy we're building now can't do what we're asking it to do. Too few ships, too much forward deployed time, not enough maintenance, we're grinding down the crews, etc. All of those things are way against us. There are better ways to do this. We refuse to do it because we're wedded to these huge, exquisite platforms. And admittedly, Congress is a big part of this. The Navy made the courageous decision maybe to not refuel the Harry S. Truman. And we found out we were going to refuel a Harry S. Truman, or we really were going to get hammered by Congress. So I think we have to think through and shift how we are building the Navy, what the Navy's for. And I think we got to give up a little bit of the mythology that it prevents war and actually do a study on it. For instance, the MUSOC's got to be forward. What's it done in the last 15 years? Who's it intimidated? Who can it intimidate? Because it can't sit 20 miles offshore anymore.
So before we run out of time here and have concluding remarks, I want to ask about the role of allies. We've talked a lot about the limits of U.S. military or the U.S. naval forces, both what they can do with the ships they have and what U.S. shipbuilding can accomplish. And it seems like allies can help fill maybe both of these gaps, both to help. We know that allies like Korea and Japan are much more effective at building ships than the United States. They are much faster. And they also have naval forces, especially Japan. So can allies help to fill in some of these gaps?
Well, they do. But I would think, here again is a case of why not lots and lots of cheap missiles coming out of Japan? I mean, I know where your ships are. I can identify them. I can go after them. But if instead of buying $1 billion carrier, I buy 1,000 cheap missiles and spread them all over Japan, you can't interdict that. That creates uncertainty. And I think the other thing is the F-35 may be the world's greatest Ponzi scheme. We keep selling it to allies when we can't produce enough for ourselves. And it's a weapon system that's very easy to defeat. Get the airfield. I mean, that was the cratering effect that Kelly Greco just published. If instead we say, instead of investing that $738 billion or $1 billion in one aircraft, buy 70,000 missiles. And then ask China, which would you rather fight?
Lyle or Russell, any comments on allies?
Go ahead, Russell.
It's the fundamental question. When we talk, I told you I got nervous about pacing. China builds 40%, 46% of world shipbuilding. We build less than 1%. But holy cow, South Korea does 29% and Japan does 17%. All of a sudden, that formula doesn't look so unbalanced anymore. But that is a big jump forward. Whether we think about that as extended industrial might that we can tap into, capitalizing on significant national subsidies, and then even further on into shared fighting forces and actually expecting and needing them to be around the world and in hotspots, whether that be a fighting war or not. That is why this can't just be a Navy conversation. It needs to be a national conversation. I was very excited about what we were doing in the last administration to have that conversation. We'll see. It's still in the running, I guess, but it makes me a little bit nervous as we start trying to fundamentally change the relation of not just U.S. industrial policy, but like U.S. industrial relationship to the whole world. It doesn't look like the best answer to me, but the allies and partners are an incredibly promising bright spot and one that we do have to have a national conversation about what that looks like. But if we do, has very immediate solutions to it.
Yeah, I agree with these comments. And to me, South Korea and Japan in particular do offer some opportunities. Now, let's be candid. I mean, workers don't come cheap in those countries either. So, and as I said before, a program like AUKUS can have a lot of costs too, because it just complicates everything, right? So there is that problem. Nevertheless, in my dream world, for our, say, surface fleet, or the Navy in general, we could have, some substantial specialization where, say, Japan's building the destroyer, South Korea is building the frigates, and we're doing the submarines for this kind of, as it were, alliance type fleet. So to me, that would be ideal. And we may indeed want to consider going in even on conventional submarines. I think U.S. Navy even has been impressed by their performance. Remember the Gotland, how it worked over the, was it the Reagan carrier group? So, I mean, to me, we may want to explore that, and both South Korea and Japan excel in that in conventional submarines too. So yeah, I think there are ways to go, but it's going to be complicated, and let's not pretend it's going to, as it were, solve this very drastic kind of shortfall in our capabilities vis-a-vis China. Over.
Great. So we've covered a lot of ground here. I want to give each of you a chance to just wrap up with some 1 to 2 minutes of concluding remarks. Why don't we go in the reverse order that we went last time? So Russell, TX, and then Lyle.
Well, first, thanks for everything. I'm not sure in this conversation we actually solved what the coming war is and how it will be fought. I take some solace that puts us right in Bob Gates and Bill Lynn's point that, we have a perfect record of not guessing the next war correctly. Nevertheless, I do think we pointed out that even in this conversation and for this audience, there's some anxiety about shipbuilding and what that portends for U.S. industrial might and how we remain the greatest and richest power on earth. Figuring that out requires doing something more than the status quo. I was very impressed to find out the Navy had stopped going down the same path they were. I do think they are serious about the potential for new solutions like TX and Lyle referenced, but nevertheless, we still have more to do to solve that national problem with the national solution.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is that I think we've come to an agreement that no matter what we do, we can't match China for shipbuilding. And if we try to get Japan and Korea in once the war starts, they're within short range missile, all their shipyards can be taken out pretty quickly. So if we can't do ships, then we've got to think something else. Now, if we want to continue to do the President's mission, there are different kinds of ships we can build for less money, but a lot more firepower. But we've just got to rethink the basic structure of the Navy, even if we want to continue with the mission as we've got. And it does not involve the ability to build lots of ships. That doesn't seem to be anywhere on the horizon.
Well, yeah, and I just wrap up by saying, we have. I think Russ is right. We don't have a great record of guessing wars, and yet, he referenced the founders and said, we should think of the war against the Barbary pirates. But I will remind you that the founders gave the Congress the power to make war, and Congress hasn't declared war since 1941. So to me, they would not want to see carrier groups deployed all over the world, threatening war here, threatening war there, lobbing cruise missiles in here, launching strikes here and there. That is totally not what they would want. So I think we need a different kind of Navy. Look, like I said, we're investing a huge amount in this Columbia class, the new boomer, to enhance our nuclear deterrent. I think that's wise. But if we thought a Taiwan war was going to break out in the next few years, we wouldn't do that. We'd stop all work on Columbia because it's really not relevant, and we would put it all in on these attack subs or something like that. But it's not likely. We shouldn't fight a war in Taiwan really anytime soon or ever, really. I disagree with TX that he seems to think the drones are going to solve that problem. Look, China, there is no bigger superpower in the area of drones than China. So the idea that you're going to out-drone China in the Strait is, to me, is just a pile of beans, I'm afraid. We haven't talked about the South China Sea at all, but there, I would argue that if we rein in our objectives to just defending the main islands of the Philippines, don't try to defend every rock and reef, which is insane. You say that the Navy keeps the world economy afloat. I don't think so. To me, this kind of war talk in the South China Sea is the Wall Street guys don't like that too much. So look, the bottom line is the problem is with a strategy. Okay, so we have to bring the strategy into alignment with our means, and we can do that.
So even though we didn't solve any problems here today, I think we came to some really important points of agreement. One is that the current problem isn't just shipbuilding, but the strategy that the United States is using, that having more ships won't solve the problem. It's also about different types of weapons and a different approach to thinking about national security and the conflicts that the United States might face in the future. I think there's disagreement here on whether the Navy is too small or the right size, but there is agreement on the fact that the Navy probably doesn't have the right types of ships or the right types of capabilities for the future. Even if it needs carriers, still, it definitely needs more of other types of things. So I think these are really important points of context that can help all of us to think about the challenges that the United States faces and to put some of the debate going on out in the outside world and in Congress and inside the Pentagon in context. So this has been a great discussion. Thanks everybody for joining today, and enjoy the rest of your day.